Afghan instability, a background, and this flag of Afghanistan kind of symbolizes a lot. The black means chaos, the red is blood of the soldiers, and the green is peace, also the color of Islam. Peace is a good word to use to describe Afghanistan in the past. These photos come from the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s in Afghanistan. Are you surprised? Actually, it used to be a very beautiful country and somewhat wealthy. They had a lot of visitors from around the world in the old days, including hippies from Europe who would go there to travel and have fun, and including Japan's previous and empress when they were the prince and the princess. They went there on a honeymoon, and you can see in this picture on the left, there in Bamyan in front of the giant Buddha statue. It was also a really free country. Look at the bottom right. You can see university girls who in those days didn't wear anything on their head, wore miniskirts, and were very fashionable. In those days, they had a king, and this is when it all started, all the problems. So the king's cousin, named Daoud, he was prime minister, and he took power for himself. When the king was out of Afghanistan, Daoud took the power and told him not to come back. Daoud stayed in power. He was not there too long. He was quickly killed and removed from power by communists, or these groups themselves had problems, and they started to fight inside the communists. This is the beginning of everything, from the peace under the king to quick changes of power. Well, the fighting between the communists made some problems. You know, the Soviet Union was very happy that they had communist friends in Afghanistan and were nervous that the communist group would break down and that their preferred group would not have power. So to help them, in 1979, in December, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. They sent their army in there, and they began to fight locals and others. You can see some images here. So what happened due to that? Well, two big issues started because of the Soviet invasion, which would last for 10 years. The first was local people began to fight against the Soviets. So local militias, armies were made. We call them mujahideen. And these mujahideen were supported by America, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. Basically, America and Saudi Arabia would give money and weapons, and Pakistan would pass those to the Afghans, teach them how to fight, and give them other support. They made several small groups of Afghans led by warlords or strong leaders. At the bottom from left to right, Rabbani, Dostum, Hekmatyar, Khalili, and on right, Masood. These groups were usually separated by one of three ways, right? Region, so where they are, or two, ethnicity, and religion, meaning are they Shia or Sunni? Which type of Islam are they, for example? So that's one thing that started these groups. The second thing that started was that refugees began to leave Afghanistan. About 25% of all Afghans became refugees during this time. And most of them went to Pakistan, into a camp like this one you see here. Others went to Iran and other places, but most went to Pakistan. And in their time in Pakistan, of course, they had a very poor life, like you can see from this picture. But another big problem was that it's a time when things started to change. Many schools, religious schools, called madrasas, were built near the Afghan refugee camps. Actually, madrasa is a very fine school. It's a good kind of school, religious, but it teaches everything you should know. But not these madrasas. These madrasas, their main point was to teach a kind of version where they didn't accept others, where they would fight to protect. And in these schools, they also taught children, look at the picture on the bottom right, children how to fight, how to use weapons. Why would students be sent there? Well, the madrasas made a very good deal for the families. They said to the families in the refugee camp, who are very poor, if you send us your sons for school, they will get free education, they will get free food, free place to stay, and we'll even send some money to support your family. So many Afghans sent their children to these schools not knowing the kind of school they were, not knowing that their children would be trained for fighting. What happened to those boys? Well, I'll talk about that later, but let's talk about the cost of the Afghan war. So you can see on the top some before pictures and on the bottom some after pictures. So Afghanistan was very much destroyed. About 10% of people are said to have died in the war that the Soviets attacked them. And about 25%, as I said, became refugees in other countries. And more, of course, had to leave their homes and move to other places in Afghanistan. But when the Soviets finally left in 1989, the communists, Kyosanto, right, they were still in power. Not long. Those mujahideen that I told you about, Hekmatyar, Rabbani, and so on, began to share power, but it didn't work. So they started to fight each other. And they made this civil war, this Nisan, right? Each group taking part of Afghanistan, but all wanting power for everything. To do this, and because there was no law, things got out of control. The Mujahideen started to abuse local people, take their money, and all sorts of terrible things to them. Well, this is where the students of the religious schools of the madrasas return. So in about 2006, a teacher, his name was Mullah Omar, he found some of these Mujahideen fighters who were not happy with what their leaders and other Mujahideen were doing. And together they became leaders of a new group. And this group, they said, was to stop the Mujahideen from doing bad things in the country, to bring Afghanistan into a religious country mode. And their fighters were those students, the boys from the refugee camps. And since student is called Talib in the language, well, the group was called Taliban. These people, first, they were very welcomed, and people were happy to see them because they were there to change the country, they thought. But once they took over, and they took over very quickly, they made new rules and laws, and these rules were very restrictive, very difficult. For example, you can see the picture of the blue kind of sheet. This is a burqa. It's women's clothing, and all women had to wear this clothing in the Taliban government. You can't see anything. Even so that you couldn't see women, every house had to cover its windows and paint them black. The Taliban also put the restrictions on men, you know. Men had to grow a long beard. It had to be about 2 fists long. And if it was less, they would beat you. They made everything that they said was not Islamic illegal. So music was illegal. Sports were illegal. You know, all these things. And they destroyed the beautiful Bamyan Buddha, which Japan's emperor and empress had visited, because Buddhism is not Islam, and they said it was not okay. The Taliban had one thing that made them famous around the world, and that was that they hosted groups from other countries, terrorist groups, and the most famous was the Al-Qaeda. And their leader was a man named Osama bin Laden. If you're not familiar with the name Al-Qaeda, they are the group that carried out the terrorist attack in New York and Washington, D.C. in America in 2001. This is a picture of the trade towers in New York that Al-Qaeda used airplanes to hit and destroy. After that attack, America demanded that the Taliban give Al-Qaeda to America, and the Taliban refused. And because of that refusal, America attacked Afghanistan along with its allies and supported some of the old Mujahideen groups. So you can see Afghanistan has had war now since the 1970s. It's the longest war in the world right now, active war. But it's not just been one war, it's been many conflicts, right? Many different conflicts. A peaceful country only a few decades ago was turned into this, which makes you worry. Could another peaceful country have this sort of thing happen? And it makes you wonder, as we talked about, Afghanistan got poorer and poorer from conflict, and it's more and more difficult to stop fighting and stop conflict when you're poor, from a fairly rich country to what we have now. Well, that's the background of the conflict. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.